At 7:45 p.m. on a chilly Friday evening in October 2021, Helena, Montana stood still, blanketed in the quiet of the night. But inside the historic First National Bank, something extraordinary was taking place. Beneath the building, in a forgotten vault that hadn't seen daylight for decades, Frank Delaney, a 52-year-old construction worker, was about to alter his life forever. With sweat dripping from his brow and a crowbar in his hand, Frank stared at gleaming gold bars that seemed to beckon him, a treasure that held the promise of salvation for his family, but came with a heavy price. This moment wasn't a whim or a stroke of luck. It was the culmination of a lifetime of hardship, loyalty, and increasingly desperate decisions. To truly understand why Frank risked everything, we need to go back to the beginning, to the story of a man who loved his family, his land, and his legacy more than anything, and who was willing to sacrifice it all for a chance at redemption. Frank Delaney was born in 1969 on the Delaney Ranch, a 200-acre property nestled on the outskirts of Helena. The land had been in his family for 4 generations, its rolling hills and weathered barns a testament to their resilience. For Frank, the ranch was more than just a home. It was a symbol of his family's history and their bond with Montana's rugged terrain. Frank's parents, Thomas and Mary, were hard-working ranchers who instilled in him a relentless work ethic and a deep sense of responsibility. As the only child, Frank often felt the weight of their expectations. From the age of 6, he was rising before dawn to help milk cows, feed horses, and mend fences. The long days were grueling, but he took pride in his work, knowing it was part of something bigger than himself. Despite their diligence, life on the ranch wasn't easy. By the 1980s, Montana's agricultural industry was struggling. Droughts, fluctuating market prices, and mounting debts took their toll on the Delaney family. Frank watched as his parents stretched every dollar and worked tirelessly to keep the ranch afloat. When he graduated from Helena High School in 1987, Frank faced a heartbreaking decision. The ranch couldn't support both him and his aging parents, and with foreclosure looming, Frank made the difficult choice to leave and find work. "One day I'll come back and make it right," he told his father as he left, carrying only a duffel bag and a heart full of promises. Frank's knack for fixing things made construction a natural fit. By the early 1990s, he had built a reputation as a reliable and skilled worker. He specialized in renovations, finding satisfaction in restoring old structures to their former glory. His projects often involved historic buildings, where he encountered relics of Montana's past, abandoned safes, hidden compartments, and even tunnels once used during the gold rush. In 1995, Frank married Laura Mitchell, his high school sweetheart. Their life together was simple but fulfilling. They welcomed 2 children, Emily in 1997 and Jacob in 2000. And Frank took pride in being a devoted father. Despite his long hours on construction sites, he never missed a soccer game or a school recital. But while Frank built a stable life for his family, the Delaney Ranch was slipping further into debt. After Thomas passed away in 2005, Frank inherited the ranch and its financial burdens. Over the next decade, he juggled construction work with futile attempts to save the property. By 2010, foreclosure notices became a regular occurrence, and Frank's dream of preserving his family's legacy seemed increasingly out of reach. In late 2011, Frank was hired to work on the renovation of the First National Bank in Helena. The project involved updating the basement, a labyrinthine space that hadn't been touched in decades. One afternoon, while clearing debris, Frank stumbled upon something that made his breath catch, a concealed door embedded in the basement wall. Curiosity got the better of him. Using his tools, he pried the door open to reveal a hidden vault. Inside were gold bars stacked neatly, their dull gleam hinting at their age. Frank's mind raced. He knew Helena had been a hub during Montana's gold rush, and it wasn't unheard of for banks to have hidden reserves from that era. But why had this vault been forgotten? And why was no one looking for it? The gold was worth millions, more than enough to save the ranch and secure his family's future. But Frank also knew the risks. Taking the gold would mean crossing a line he'd sworn never to cross. And there was another problem. he couldn't do it alone. Desperate and conflicted, Frank turned to the only two people he trusted, Mike Harris and Dave Thompson. Mike Harris had been Frank's closest friend since high school. A jovial man with a quick wit, Mike was a fellow construction worker who had faced his own financial struggles. When Frank shared his discovery, Mike was surprisingly quick to agree. "We've spent our whole lives breaking our backs for scraps," Mike said. "Maybe it's time we got a little something for ourselves." Dave Thompson, on the other hand, was a harder sell. A reserved and cautious man, Dave had a clean record and little interest in taking risks. But Frank knew something about Dave's past, a long-buried secret involving an unreported workplace accident that had resulted in a payout Dave wasn't entitled to. Frank didn't want to use this information, but he saw no other way. "You don't owe me anything, Dave," Frank said during a tense conversation at a local diner. "But you owe it to your family to keep them safe. This gold can help us all. And let's not forget, I know what happened at the mill." Reluctantly, Dave agreed, though the guilt was evident in his eyes. Over the next few months, the trio devised an intricate plan. The bank was set to experience a scheduled electrical outage in October 2021, giving them a narrow window to act. They planned to use the cover of darkness to access the vault and transport the gold without arousing suspicion. Frank's construction knowledge proved invaluable. He mapped out the basement's layout, identified blind spots in the bank's security, and even created a false wall to conceal the vault's entrance. Mike handled logistics, securing a getaway vehicle and scouting potential escape routes. Dave, though hesitant, contributed his expertise in electrical systems, ensuring the outage would last just long enough for their plan to succeed. As the day approached, tensions mounted. Mike remained optimistic, joking about what he'd do with his share of the gold. Dave grew increasingly paranoid, his anxiety manifesting in restless nights and strained conversations. Frank, caught between desperation and doubt, found solace in the thought of saving the ranch. But the gold, it seemed, had a weight far heavier than its physical mass. Unexplained accidents plagued their preparations. A collapsed beam during a site visit, a flat tire on the getaway vehicle. Mike brushed it off as bad luck, but Dave was less convinced. "You ever think this gold wasn't meant to be taken?" he asked one evening. Frank dismissed the idea, but deep down, he couldn't shake the unease. On October 14th, 2021, the trio met one final time to review their plan. The atmosphere was tense but determined. They agreed to meet at 6 p.m. the following evening and execute the heist during the scheduled outage. As Frank lay in bed that night staring at the ceiling, his mind churned with questions. Was this truly the right thing to do? Could he live with himself if it all went wrong? And why did the gold feel more like a curse than a blessing? By the time dawn broke on October 15th, the die had been cast. The heist was only hours away, and Frank Delaney was about to embark on a path that would change his life forever. The air was heavy on the morning of October 15th, 2021. The day of the heist had finally arrived, and the trio of conspirators, Frank Delaney, Mike Harris, and Dave Thompson, were poised to set their plan into motion. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. Frank's phone rang at 9 a.m., the shrill tone cutting through the silence of his small kitchen. It was Mike, his voice faint and strained. "Frank, I don't think I can make it tonight," he said between labored breaths. "What do you mean, Mike? What's wrong?" Frank asked, his stomach tightening. "I woke up feeling awful," Mike explained. "Fever, chills, and I can barely stand. I don't know what's happening, but I can't be there." Frank clenched his jaw, his mind racing. Mike had been a cornerstone of their plan. Losing him on the day of the heist was a blow they couldn't afford. "We need you, Mike," Frank said, desperation creeping into his voice. "I know," Mike replied, coughing violently. "But I can still help. I'll monitor the police scanner and keep an eye on the street cameras from my laptop. If anything looks off, I'll call you." Reluctantly, Frank agreed. Mike's role shifted from active participant to remote lookout, but his absence cast a shadow over the plan. By 5:30 p.m., Frank and Dave were loading their tools into the getaway van, their movements methodical but tense. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and crimson. As they approached the First National Bank, Dave suddenly doubled over, clutching his side. "Damn it, Frank," he groaned. "I think I pulled something. Feels like a knife in my ribs." Frank stopped the van, his eyes narrowing. "Not you too," he muttered. "I'll be fine," Dave insisted, grimacing as he straightened up. "We can't back out now." Frank hesitated, but they were too far in to turn back. "All right," he said finally. "Let's stick to the plan." At precisely 7:15 p.m., the scheduled electrical outage plunged the bank into darkness. Frank and Dave, dressed in black and wearing gloves, approached the rear entrance of the building. Using a duplicate key they had crafted weeks earlier, they unlocked the door and slipped inside. The bank's basement was their destination, a maze of corridors and storage rooms that led to the hidden vault. Frank led the way, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. The silence was oppressive, broken only by their footsteps and the occasional creak of the old building. At the vault door, Frank pulled out a crowbar and a custom-made lock-picking device. His construction expertise paid off as he manipulated the ancient locking mechanism, the tumblers clicking into place one by one. After several tense minutes, the door swung open, revealing the gleaming gold bars inside. Dave whistled softly. "It's even more than I thought," he said, his pain momentarily forgotten. Frank didn't respond. He was already moving, loading the bars into a reinforced duffel bag. Each bar was heavy, their combined weight a stark reminder of the physical toll this heist would take. They worked quickly, their actions rehearsed and efficient. As they loaded the last of the gold, Frank's phone vibrated. It was Mike. "You've got about 10 minutes before the patrol car loops back around," he warned. "You need to be out of there." "Understood," Frank replied, his voice steady. They exited the vault, retracing their steps to the rear entrance. Outside, the van waited, its engine idling softly. Dave winced as he hefted the duffel bag into the back, the strain evident on his face. Frank climbed into the driver's seat, and within moments they were on the road, disappearing into the night. The drive back to their rendezvous point was uneventful. Mike's updates over the phone confirmed that the streets were clear, and the police were unaware of the heist. By the time they unloaded the gold at Frank's storage unit, it seemed as though their plan had gone off without a hitch. But the sense of triumph was short-lived. The following morning, Frank's phone rang in the stillness of his kitchen, jolting him from his thoughts. The number on the screen was familiar. Laura, Mike's wife. He answered quickly, her voice immediately breaking through, panicked and breathless. "Frank, something's wrong with Mike," she began, her words tumbling over one another. "He collapsed this morning and I can't get him to wake up. He was burning up all night, but now he's barely breathing." Frank's blood ran cold. The image of his lifelong friend lying unconscious sent a wave of fear through him. "Did you call an ambulance?" he asked, already grabbing his coat. "Yes, they're on the way, but I thought you should know. Frank, I'm scared. He was fine yesterday." "I'm on my way," Frank assured her, hanging up. He couldn't shake the dread pooling in his chest. Mike had been their lookout, monitoring the police scanner from home during the heist. Nothing physically strenuous, nothing that should have caused this. Yet here he was, unconscious and barely clinging to life. As Frank was about to head out the door, his phone rang again. This time it was Dave. "Dave?" Frank answered, his voice sharp with tension. "Frank, something's happening to me," Dave said, his voice trembling. He sounded disoriented, as though speaking through a fog. "My car won't start. Just died on me when I was trying to leave for work. Then the plumbing in my house exploded, flooding the basement. And now I've got this splitting headache. I can barely think straight." Frank tightened his grip on the phone, his unease deepening with every word. "Dave, calm down. Have you seen a doctor?" "No, I don't know, Frank. Do you think this has something to do with the gold?" The question hung in the air like a curse itself. Frank had dismissed the old legends as superstitions, nothing more than stories told to spook miners and treasure hunters. But now, with Mike unconscious and Dave unraveling, the coincidences felt too deliberate to ignore. Don't jump to conclusions, Frank said, though he hardly believed his own words. Take it easy and I'll check in later. Hanging up, Frank stood frozen for a moment, his thoughts racing. Was this really just bad luck? Two men, both instrumental to the heist, now facing inexplicable calamities? When Frank arrived at Mike's house, the ambulance was already there. He watched as paramedics loaded his friend onto a stretcher, an oxygen mask over his pale face. Laura stood by the door, tears streaming down her cheeks. He wouldn't wake up, she whispered when Frank approached. I tried everything. He's never been sick like this before. Frank placed a hand on her shoulder. He's in good hands now. They'll figure out what's wrong. But as he watched the ambulance pull away, Frank's reassurance felt hollow. Mike had been fine the night of the heist, albeit exhausted. What could have caused such a sudden and severe collapse? Later that afternoon, Frank drove to Dave's house. The sight that greeted him was chaotic. The driveway was littered with tools and car parts, and the basement windows glistened with moisture from the flooded plumbing. Inside, Dave was slumped in a chair, his face ashen and his eyes bloodshot. I can't catch a break, Frank, Dave muttered. First the car, then the pipes, and now this damn headache. I feel like my head's going to split in two. Frank crouched in front of him, concern etched on his face. Did you take anything for it? Painkillers? Something? Yeah, but it's not helping, Dave said, wincing. I don't know what's happening. It's like everything's falling apart. Frank scanned the room, noting the disarray. Tools scattered carelessly, water damage creeping up the walls, an air of despair that seemed to suffocate the space. He thought back to the gold, its cold metallic gleam, and the whispered stories of misfortune tied to treasures like it. Do you really think it's the gold? Dave asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Frank hesitated. Logic told him no. Gold was an inert metal, incapable of causing harm. But his gut told a different story. I don't know, he admitted finally. But we need to figure this out. Take it easy, Dave. I'll be in touch. That night, Frank couldn't sleep. His mind replayed the events of the past 24 hours like a broken record. Mike, barely clinging to life. Dave, unraveling under the weight of inexplicable chaos. And him? Was he next? Frank sat at his kitchen table, a cup of coffee growing cold in his hands. He opened his laptop and began searching, his fingers flying over the keys. He typed in variations of cursed gold, Montana mining legends, and treasure misfortunes. The results were a mix of folklore and fact, but one story stood out. It was the tale of Jeremiah Hartwell, a miner from the 1880s who had allegedly hidden a cache of gold during a labor dispute. According to the account, Hartwell had died under mysterious circumstances shortly after stashing the treasure. Subsequent attempts to retrieve it were met with tragedy. Accidents, illnesses, and financial ruin befell those who tried to claim it. The more Frank read, the more the pieces began to fit. The vault they had uncovered was from the same era, its gold untouched for decades. Could this be the same treasure? Frank leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. He had dismissed the idea of a curse as ridiculous, but now, with everything that had happened, he wasn't so sure. If the gold was cursed, what could he do about it? And more importantly, how far would the curse go to protect itself? As dawn broke, Frank stared out the window, his reflection hollow in the glass. He was a man who had gambled everything for a chance to save his family, and now, it seemed, he had invited something far darker into their lives. Would he keep the gold, risking further calamities? Or would he find a way to rid himself of it before it consumed them all? As Frank stared at the gleaming bars, their allure was overshadowed by the weight of their history. He was faced with an impossible decision. Keep the gold and risk further ruin, or find a way to rid himself of the treasure and its curse. But how does one dispose of something so valuable and so dangerous? The screen fades to black, and the narrator's voice returns. If you were in Frank Delaney's shoes, what would you do? Would you keep the gold and hope to break the curse, or walk away and leave behind the fortune that could save your family? Let us know in the comments below, and stay tuned for the next chapter of this gripping story. Frank's phone buzzed on the table, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was another call from Laura. Bracing himself, he picked it up, dreading what he might hear next. On Monday morning, October 18, 2021, the First National Bank in Helena buzzed with its usual activity. Employees arrived promptly at 8 a.m., ready to begin another routine week. But as the day progressed, a series of anomalies began to surface. Account managers conducting end-of-week reconciliations flagged significant discrepancies, leading to a hurried investigation of the bank's physical assets. When the vault was opened, the gravity of the situation became apparent. Gold bars that had been stored in a concealed, nearly forgotten compartment, rumored to be a relic from the gold rush days, were gone. Shock turned to panic as the realization set in. Someone had stolen the gold, and they had done so without triggering alarms or leaving any obvious signs of forced entry. Lisa Carmichael, the branch manager, immediately reported the theft to the Helena Police Department. Detective Richard Callahan, a seasoned investigator with over 20 years of experience, was assigned to the case. Callahan was known for his dogged determination and his knack for solving even the most baffling crimes. But this case, he would soon discover, was unlike any other. Callahan arrived at the bank that afternoon, accompanied by a team of officers and forensic specialists. The initial walkthrough revealed no clear point of entry. The vault door was intact, the security cameras had recorded no unusual activity, and the building's alarm system had shown no breaches during the weekend. Whoever pulled this off knew exactly what they were doing, Callahan remarked to his partner, Detective Helena Martinez. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment job. It was planned down to the last detail. The detectives began interviewing bank employees, but no one reported anything out of the ordinary. The only clue was the scheduled power outage on Friday evening, which had temporarily disabled the bank's security systems. Could someone have exploited the outage? Martinez asked. Possibly, Callahan replied. But how did they know about it? And how did they bypass the vault's locks? The first major lead was the bank's security footage. The detectives pored over hours of recordings, focusing on the days leading up to the heist. They scrutinized every person who entered the building, cross-referencing them against employee records and customer logs. But the footage from Friday evening, the critical window during the power outage, was missing. The outage had not only disabled the live cameras, but it also corrupted the backup system. The lack of footage was both a setback and a point of intrigue. It's almost like they knew exactly when and where to strike, Martinez said. Whoever did this had insider knowledge. Callahan nodded grimly. Or they were incredibly lucky. The next focus was the vault's locking mechanism. The bank's technicians confirmed that the locks were state-of-the-art, designed to resist tampering. Yet there were no signs of forced entry or manipulation. How do you crack a lock like this without leaving a trace? Callahan muttered as he examined the vault door. The locksmith brought in for consultation offered no answers. If someone opened this vault, they had the exact combination, he said. Or they're a ghost. The lack of physical evidence frustrated the detectives, pushing them to explore alternative theories. Forensic specialists scoured the basement for clues. They dusted for fingerprints, searched for stray hairs or fibers, and even tested for footprints. But the results were confounding. There was nothing. It's like they floated in and out, one technician commented. Callahan's frustration grew. No one pulls off a heist like this without leaving something behind, he said. This doesn't make sense. Desperate for leads, Callahan turned to the gold itself. He contacted local historians and mining experts, hoping to uncover information about the vault's origins and its contents. What he discovered was a series of unsettling stories. The gold, as it seemed, had a dark history. It was tied to Jeremiah Hartwell, a 19th century miner who had allegedly hidden the treasure to protect it during a violent labor dispute. Legends claimed that anyone who tried to claim the gold met with tragedy, accidents, illnesses, financial ruin. Callahan dismissed the curse as superstition, but the coincidences were hard to ignore. As the investigation stalled, calamity struck again. On October 20th, Frank received the call he had been dreading. Mike had passed away in the hospital. The official cause was heart failure, but to Frank it felt like something more sinister. The loss of his closest friend shook Frank to his core. For days he avoided Dave's calls, unable to confront the growing sense of doom that hung over them. But when he finally answered, Dave's voice was frantic. "Frank, we have to return it," Dave said. "The gold, it's cursed, it's killing us." Frank's initial skepticism had eroded. Too much had happened. Mike's illness, Dave's unexplained misfortunes, and now Mike's death. Reluctantly, he agreed. Frank and Dave devised a meticulous plan to return the gold to the vault without being detected. They studied the police's movements, timing their return to coincide with a lull in patrols. They decided to replicate their original entry, using the same tools and techniques. The night of October 22nd, they loaded the gold into the van, their nerves on edge. The drive to the bank was tense, each passing car a potential threat. Once they arrived, they retraced their steps, moving through the basement with the same precision they had used during the heist. When they reached the vault, Frank felt a strange sense of relief, as though the gold itself wanted to return to its resting place. But as they began placing the bars back inside, the sound of footsteps echoed through the basement. "Freeze! Hands in the air!" The harsh beam of a flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating Frank and Dave as they stood frozen in place. Officers swarmed the room, their guns drawn. Callahan stepped forward, his expression a mix of triumph and disbelief. Well, looks like we caught our ghosts." Frank and Dave were handcuffed and led out of the building. As they were placed in the back of a squad car, Frank glanced at the gold one last time. Its dull gleam seemed almost mocking, a silent reminder of the price they had paid. The arrest of Frank Delaney and Dave Thompson sent shockwaves through Helena, Montana. The story of two ordinary construction workers who had executed, and then attempted to undo, a daring gold heist captivated the nation. What drove two seemingly hard-working, unassuming men to steal millions in gold, only to try and return it? This was the question that would be dissected in the courtroom over the coming months. By the time the trial began in December 2021, the case had gained nationwide attention. Journalists from across the country descended upon Helena, eager to cover what some were calling the curse of the Montana gold heist. The small courthouse overflowed with spectators, forcing court officials to set up an overflow room with a live video feed. The prosecution framed the case as a calculated crime. Assistant District Attorney Rachel Mendez opened the trial with a blistering statement. This was not a crime of desperation, but one of greed, carried out by two men who believed they could take what wasn't theirs without consequence. Their attempt to return the gold only underscores their recognition of guilt, not redemption. The defense, led by criminal attorney Peter Winslow, painted a different picture. Winslow described Frank and Dave as victims of circumstances beyond their control, driven to their actions by desperation and an eerie series of events. "My clients are not hardened criminals," Winslow argued. "They are men who found themselves in extraordinary situations and made choices they believed were necessary, however misguided those choices may have been." Over the course of several weeks, the prosecution presented a meticulous case, relying on forensic evidence, witness testimony, and the defendant's own actions to establish intent. Investigators detailed how Frank and Dave had bypassed the bank's security measures. The duplicate keys and tampered locks were displayed in court, alongside photographs of the hidden vault and its empty shelves. The timeline of the heist, reconstructed from bank records and police findings, demonstrated the precision with which it had been executed. "Every step of this crime was planned," Mendez told the jury. "From the moment they discovered the vault to the night they returned, they knew exactly what they were doing." Bank employees testified about their interactions with Frank during the renovation project. Many described him as personable and professional, but one maintenance worker recalled overhearing Frank asking detailed questions about the building's electrical systems. "I thought it was odd at the time," the worker admitted, "but he said it was for the renovation, so I didn't think much of it." Detective Richard Callahan took the stand to outline the investigation. He described the series of dead ends the police had encountered, framing them as deliberate attempts by the defendants to cover their tracks. "We were dealing with professionals," Callahan said. They left no fingerprints, no footprints, and no digital trail. It was only their attempt to return the gold that gave us the break we needed. Winslow faced an uphill battle. The evidence against his clients was overwhelming, but he sought to humanize them and cast doubt on their motivations. Frank took the stand, his demeanor solemn but resolute. He described his discovery of the vault and the gold, framing it as an overwhelming temptation in the face of mounting debts. "I didn't plan to steal it," Frank told the court. "At first I thought it was just a piece of history, something that belonged to the past. But as things got worse with the ranch and the bills piled up, I started to think maybe it was a way out." When asked why he attempted to return the gold, Frank hesitated, his eyes downcast. "Because it felt wrong. From the moment we took it, things started falling apart. Mike's death, Dave's problems, it was like the gold carried something with it. I thought if we put it back, maybe it would end." Dave was more subdued, clearly uncomfortable in the witness chair. His testimony mirrored Frank's but focused on his reluctance to participate in the first place. "I didn't want to do it," Dave admitted. "But Frank convinced me. He made it sound like it was the only way to save the ranch. And then, after everything that happened, I just wanted it to be over." Though the curse was never explicitly mentioned in the charges, it loomed large over the trial. Winslow leaned heavily on the legend of Jeremiah Hartwell and the vault's dark history, using it to frame his client's actions as desperate rather than malicious. "Every person who's come into contact with that gold has suffered," Winslow argued. "My clients are no exception. They didn't steal it out of greed. They were trying to escape its grip." The prosecution dismissed the curse as a convenient excuse. "The only thing haunting this gold is the greed of those who take it," Mendez countered. "The idea of a curse doesn't absolve these men of their crimes." After 5 weeks of testimony, the jury retired to deliberate. For 3 days, the courthouse was filled with tension as everyone awaited the verdict. On January 15, 2022, the jury returned with their decision. Frank Delaney and Dave Thompson were found guilty on multiple charges, including grand larceny, unlawful entry, and tampering with security systems. Sentencing took place a week later, presided over by Judge Marianne Carter, a respected figure in the Montana judicial system. In her remarks, Judge Carter acknowledged the emotional complexity of the case, but emphasized the importance of upholding the law. "Mr. Delaney and Mr. Thompson," she began, "your actions have not only caused financial harm, but have also disrupted the lives of those around you. While the court recognizes the pressures you faced, it cannot excuse the choices you made. The rule of law is clear. Theft, regardless of motivation, is a crime that must be punished." Frank was sentenced to 15 years in state prison, while Dave received 12 years, with both men eligible for parole after serving half their sentences. The gold, which had been recovered, was placed under the custody of the Montana Historical Society, where it would be studied and preserved as an artifact of the state's mining history. The trial left an indelible mark on Helena. Discussions of morality, desperation, and the influence of the curse dominated local and national conversations. The First National Bank increased its security measures, ensuring that such a heist could never happen again. For Frank and Dave, prison became a time for reflection. Letters from Frank to his family revealed a man wrestling with guilt and regret, but also holding on to hope for redemption. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to make things right," he wrote to his wife, "but I'll spend the rest of my life trying." Though the gold was safely returned, its reputation as cursed remained. Legends about the heist joined the lore surrounding Jeremiah Hartwell, ensuring that the story of the Montana gold heist would be told for generations. The case became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the lengths people will go to in times of desperation, and the unforeseen consequences that can arise when history's secrets are unearthed. The Montana gold heist quickly transcended the courtroom to become a cultural phenomenon, sparking a wave of documentaries, films, books, and podcasts that sought to unpack the mystery, morality, and mythology surrounding the crime. What set the heist apart was not just the audacity of stealing $2.3 million in gold, but the eerie sense of a curse tied to it, a detail that captured imaginations worldwide. The first major documentary, Cursed Gold, The Montana Heist, premiered on a leading streaming platform just a year after the trial. Directed by acclaimed filmmaker Sarah Kinsey, it combined dramatized reenactments with interviews from key players, including bank employees, investigators, and legal experts. The documentary didn't shy away from the supernatural element, dedicating an entire episode to the gold's alleged curse and the series of misfortunes that befell those who came into contact with it. True crime enthusiasts praised the series for its balanced approach. While some viewers were captivated by the crime's meticulous planning, others were drawn to the ethical dilemmas faced by Frank Delaney and Dave Thompson. The final episode, featuring an emotional interview with Frank from prison, became one of the platform's most watched segments that year. The heist also inspired Hollywood. In 2024, The Curse of Last Chance Gold hit theaters, featuring a fictionalized version of the events. A-list actor Mark Collier portrayed Frank Delaney, bringing a mix of grit and vulnerability to the role, while the film amplified the legend of the curse with dramatic flair. Though some critics questioned the film's accuracy, audiences were enthralled by its blend of suspense, morality, and supernatural intrigue. The movie's box office success led to discussions of a sequel focusing on the gold's earlier history during Montana's mining boom. Multiple authors penned books on the heist, ranging from investigative accounts to historical fiction. Titles like Gold and Consequences and The Carpenter's Gamble topped bestseller lists, solidifying the heist's place in modern lore. Meanwhile, podcasts like Hidden Vaults and Gold Rush Crimes explored the heist through interviews, expert analysis, and listener debates, inviting audiences to weigh in on the ethics of Frank and Dave's actions. The interactive nature of these podcasts kept the story alive, sparking online discussions about morality, justice, and greed. If you enjoyed uncovering the twists and turns of this gripping heist, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling true crime stories. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Got thoughts about the curse or the morality of this heist? Drop a comment below and join the conversation. And if you know someone who loves a great mystery, share this video with them. It's a story they won't want to miss.